Okay, welcome back to Heads and Tails. I'm absolutely delighted to have Ali Henderson with us today. Ali is the CEO of Royal National Children's SpringBoard Foundation, bit of a mouthful there, RNCSF, amongst other abbreviations. Previously, Ali worked at 10 Downing Street. Interested to hear a little bit about that. I know she's worked for local government and in various charity roles, and she brings 15 years of experience plus of leading on programming and on policy to address social inequality. Prior to becoming CEO, Ali also led SpringBoard's focus on impact and learning, so I know she knows the organisation through and through. Ali, it's a real pleasure to have you on Heads and Tails with us. Thanks for sharing the time.
Thank you, Henry.
You know full well, because we've worked together on certain bits of it, that mentoring is really important to us. So I always like to start by asking people about their experience of mentoring. Did you have a mentor? Do you have a mentor?
Yes. I mean, it's quite hard for me to just come out with one. I mean, I'm really fortunate in my current role. So I've been the CEO at SpringBoard for just over 4 years, and we've got an extraordinary board of trustees. So I suppose I, in my day-to-day work, have an army of mentors in my trustee body, and they're a diverse group. But there are people like Jane Lannon, who's an extraordinary head teacher, who I think again you know well, who often brings. I take to her some really complicated things, and she'll help me break it down. People like Tim Bunting, who's an extraordinary philanthropist and somebody who's really tried to bring coherence to the charity sector. So I get a number as a CEO of a small charity, and I think they perform different roles, but they are really important in keeping me inspired and thoughtful and bringing me back to what's important as opposed to getting into the weeds.
Thank you. Do you think you were aware of what mentoring was as a child or teenager at school? Did it appear to you over time, this mentoring concept, or were you always aware of its benefits?
I think I'm one of those very fortunate people who's got really happy, stable family life. I think that's what's driven me to the career I'm in. And so from my perspective, the ability to tap into my parents growing up, I've got a dad who was big into social justice, and sitting around the kitchen table, having a mentor in his form was a big part of our childhood. And I suppose once you've had access to that, and translating into our work now, when you don't have access to that, that's a massive gap. And when you do have access to it, you really value it. So I've always sort of sought those people out in my jobs as well. Those slightly more experienced who can keep you inspired, but that comes from a very fortunate upbringing.
Lovely. And that upbringing, perhaps you've got an anecdote you could share, maybe something that tells us a bit about you or your experience of voyaging through school.
I think I was one of those really extraordinarily annoying people at school who was very driven. And my husband, Simon, tells an anecdote about how when he first met me, I genuinely thought I was going to be the Secretary General of the UN. I mean, that was just a given. That sense of sort of limitless ambition came from my time at a brilliant all-girls day school that never gave anyone in its school population a sense they couldn't do whatever they wanted to do.
That's so lovely. And how do we give every young person out there a similar sense of that? I think it's true.
Yeah, but go on.
No, go ahead. What were you going to say?
Well, just that sense of limitless ambition. Where's that confidence come from? I mean, we talk about that a lot in our work. Because what we do is try to create those educational opportunities for young people who don't have necessarily that in their own upbringing and families. And there's something very extraordinary about a school environment that allows you to think that you can do whatever you want to do. And I come across some great schools that do that really well. My school certainly did.
Let's say school was pretty successful and, maybe not full of loads of challenges because you were loving it and taking full advantage. Things must have got tough at some moment in your career to date. What's been some of the hardest hurdles to overcome in your current role or in roles prior to that?
I mean, in our current role, it's pretty hard. Well, so as you know, I mean, we help all sorts of young people from really complicated home backgrounds to gain access, predominantly to boarding schools and occasionally, more recently, into independent day schools. It's really hard often to sort of leave that behind. And when there are young people that for whom that school placement doesn't take place, or we can't get them an offer, or in particular when they've been at school and it hasn't worked out, it's pretty hard to leave those behind sometimes. I've got 2 or 3 examples in my head of young people for whom I know that the ability to be at a boarding school would have been the thing that would have stabilised them at a particular moment in their adolescence, and it wasn't available to them for a variety of reasons to do with shifting care placements. And each time that happens, it's pretty tough. So that's not a more specific one. I think was my time at Oxfam. So I spent 5 years at Oxfam just before I joined our CSF, and I was there at the time when Oxfam went through a very complicated crisis to do with a pretty senior person who'd been left in charge of our operations in Haiti. And what I learned from that was that there was sort of an institutional inertia that allowed for behaviours to go undetected. And when you're close to that, it wasn't somebody I managed. It wasn't even somebody that it was somebody who'd been managed historically by others. But I recognise looking back that insufficient numbers of questions were asked, and that was a real learning moment for me about just being constantly curious when questions need to continue to be asked.
Two really nice examples there. I'd just like to go back to the first one.
Yeah.
In your work, you're tasked with running the organization and therefore looking at everything from quite a macro level.
Yeah.
But you probably have all the lovely wins and mini successes of understanding individual stories too.
Yeah.
Do you find it difficult to separate from the macro of what you're supposed to be focusing on from the ups and downs of individual case studies and young people?
Yeah. I think almost the opposite, actually. Having worked originally in central government, then local government, then for a massive charity, and now for a much smaller charity, there's something so brilliant about working for a relatively small organisation, because I can lead with real examples of actual operational detail. I'm really close to the business, is not the right language, but we're small enough. We're a staff team of just 12, 13 people, so we know the young people that we work with, and I can overhear and understand the need to dip in particular caseloads, and I'm sure that makes me much better at being able to provide the vision and leadership to the team for the big stuff, because I can really connect with the individual life stories of the individual young people that we're working with as well.
I think that's so important. It's lovely. It's almost a nice example of how being in the weeds or being at the coalface allows you to be better on the front line of leadership. I think that's a really nice point. To the best bits, maybe there's been an absolute shining success moment of your career that would go on the wall by the front door, or maybe a few bits and pieces of happy memories.
Lots of happy memories. I've been very fortunate to have a very diverse career. I've absolutely loved spending the entire of it in sort of public service in its broadest sense. It's very fulfilling. It might not give you the great salary, but it definitely gives you a sense of real achievement over the years. I loved working at Number 10. It was an extraordinary time. I was fortunate to work for 2 different prime ministers, having the ability to watch, so the opposite of mentoring, to be able to sort of learn from, but as an observer, some really extraordinary leaders, I think has been very formative to me. And the best moments, I think it has to be, having the opportunity to lead an organisation, like SpringBoard, which is an organisation that I had followed for a while. I'd been very interested in what it was seeking to achieve, which is to disrupt a sector that had the potential to do something really quite profound. And then being given the opportunity to be at the helm of that is incredibly fulfilling. I'm still feel like I'm as energized about that challenge even 4 years in.
Maybe you could share just a little on how that opportunity came about. I'm sure there's a story behind how you ended up running SpringBoard and what kind of tempted you into this kind of politically fascinating place to be, between, people from extreme deprivation or certainly in care or needing those opportunities, and the independent sector and all the kind of headwinds it's facing.
Yeah. Well, how it came about is that I was fortunate to benefit from a private education. It was very, very formative to me in where I am now. I recognise that. I'm also a mother of 4 kids. So as you become a mother, I've certainly found have a real interest in the power of schooling and what that environment does and how formative it is for your own children. So I'd be really intrigued by an ability to switch from international development, which had been my previous career, into an educational role. I live in a boarding school. My children have had the opportunity to go to a boarding school, and I've again seen that real power of the boarding house parent. So I became aware of SpringBoard because it was a startup. It was set up by a real visionary, two visionaries, Patrick Derham and Ian Davenport, both of whom had just an incredible vision and drive to bring some coherence to what could be an extraordinary thing, which is the widespread use of the independent school sector for a really complicated demographic of kids who have faced the most persistent educational divide, and that's young people in care and people who've got complex social care arrangements. So for me, it was a tallying of a personal perspective on education being so important with a work experience to date that had been around, influencing government policy for complex problems. And those two things coming together with, when I had the opportunity to apply for the role, I was very excited about it.
Great. And day to day, tell us a little about team life and what that looks like. And are you based from home? Are you in an office? Are you always good to know what happens under the cover?
Yeah, day to day, we are very full. We have an office which is co-located with a lot of educational charities out in West London. So we sit next door to Baby Zone, next door to Get Further, now Foster are in the building. So it's this great hotbed of kind of ideas around how to use how to have really interesting educational interventions. We're in the office 2 days a week. We hot desk with those other charities. It's a great way to save some money. We're just about, I think, figuring out how to do hybrid working well. I don't think any of us love it, but it's a practical solution. And I've got some amazing team members that we've managed to recruit who live as far wide as sort of Sheffield down to Bristol. And that's a real joy, actually, to have some great talented people who don't have to be in London. And that's, that's one good thing.
Definitely swings and roundabouts with the benefits and pitfalls. I totally feel you. Content. I think everyone loves to know what people digest as their content. Maybe there's a book, a film, a podcast, something you'd really recommend. It could be recent or not so recent.
Good question. I'm an avid podcast listener. I think I mentioned I'm a mum of 4 kids. There's not a great deal of reading that happens in my life, but I'm an avid podcast listener. I've got really into Andy Coulson's podcast recently, Crisis, What Crisis? Really interesting. So he gets, all sorts of brilliant people, interesting people reflecting on moments of leadership. And it, really, really makes you think about how you respond in moments of crisis. I've binge listened to a couple of things, life-changing, again, actually just ordinary people. I mean, it's terrible language, but not celebrities, but, real life stories about interesting people reflecting on moments that have changed their lives. And there's a good go-to one for me, which is for all the mums out there, which is called Big Careers, Small Children. I listened to one the other day, which had the CEO of Unlock, Natasha Porter. She's an amazing charity CEO, sort of similar age and stage as me, and talking about that challenge of wanting to be ambitious for your career, but also being present and available to your children. So those are some good recommendations I'd give for working mums out there.
Thank you. There's lots there. I feel similar to you on the podcast thing. I got plenty of time to listen to podcasts, but somehow my reading has died a bit of a death. How are we going to find more time to read more? That's what I'd like to know.
Yeah, I wish I could.
If someone can give me really good advice on that, I would take it gladly.
Yeah.
Apart from the very occasional holiday, not much gets read.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe a bit of time for that this summer. Who knows? Okay, great. And now it's a tough one, this, but an unpopular or controversial opinion. There must be something that you feel aligned with that maybe somebody else would sit on the other side of the fence, and you're happy now to stand up and defend it. In our day-to-day work, I do a lot of standing up for the power of the independent school sector. That's not always a popular opinion. We spend a lot of our working life trying to encourage social work professionals to consider an independent school for a child in care. And we often have to bust a lot of misapprehensions about what those environments offer.
And it shouldn't be controversial, because it really should be the case that a great education is just a great education, and it doesn't matter who pays for it. We've been pretty successful, but we're still banging the drum for the rights of all looked after children to have the full suite of school choice. So, whether it's an independent school or a state-made day school, whether it's a boarding school or a day school, it shouldn't really matter. It's just about what is the best school for that child in that moment in their life, and in wherever they happen to live. Not always, doesn't always land particularly well, but actually when you go to schools and you see what independent schools can offer, it's pretty hard to argue that shouldn't be available to those that most need access to that sort of extraordinary holistic education.
I'm with you. I think just enabling that kind of open-mindedness from people must be a challenge sometimes in the first instance, but once you're there, it's worth the squeeze. With all the sector faces, the independent school sector more broadly, some of which will affect you guys and some of which may not affect you at all, do you need to batten down the hatches? Do you go out and fight harder? What's on your to-do list in the next 2-3 years pending potential political change?
Yeah, I mean, I think our work has never felt more relevant, actually. Those independent schools won't exist regardless of what political persuasion the next government is. As we know, they're independent institutions. You can't abolish a whole sector. And so given this exists, then it is this extraordinary asset that the country has. I think we've never felt more ambitious for what we can achieve in terms of the numbers of young people who most need access to those places rising. We've got some very helpful proponents from across the political divide. We've got people like David Laws and David Lammy on our advisory board, as well as some from the Conservative Party. And actually, what they all say, including those in the Labour Party, is when it comes to interventions to support vulnerable children, actually all politics really does need to be off the table. And that will be continue to be where we sit with this. We just stand for the power of a great education. And I think that's more relevant now than ever.
That's a nice place to be, I think. Potentially a better place than others. Can I ask to finish, what one piece of advice might you have for someone in the sector? Maybe something you've learned along the way, or something you would make sure that every young person knew before heading out into educational charity?
Oh gosh, is it a bit corny to say the power of a great mentor? I mean, I definitely wouldn't have got to the position I'm in today if it hadn't have been for the opportunity that I've had to watch and learn from great people. Not always perhaps in formal mentoring relationships, but certainly I'd taken opportunities to work sort of as, advisors to very senior leaders, and being able to mirror and understand how they make decisions has stood me in really good stead, I think. So yeah, perhaps just the spotting people that you can learn from and trying to stay on their tailgates.
Get in front of them. I like that. I always say to people when they say, "Oh, what sector should I choose, or what job should I go into?" I think just find your way in front of really impressive people, because whether it's an area you're interested in or not, you're going to learn lots from them in the process. Exposure to those people. That's great. Thank you so much for joining us, Ali. You've been full of wisdom as expected, and SpringBoard is a really fascinating engine just to watch move and grow, and no doubt it's in super safe hands with you for the times ahead. So we wish you well and look forward to continuing to work together and hear more of your wisdom through any other channel we can find. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Henry.